Welcome students, we're in lesson 62. We're going to talk about how to do fractional word problems or fractional parts of numbers. So when we have these fractional numbers or these fractional word problems, we have a specific formula that we follow, and that formula is a fraction, the fraction times some number is equal to another number. And this is going to be the formula that we use the most. Fraction times some number is equal to b. So if 5/8 of the gnomes who live in the magic forest had happy faces, that's a big long stretch of words, right? One of the easiest things that you can do is to cross out the prepositional phrases of the gnomes who lived in the magic forest. So we could get rid of that, and now we know that 5/8 had happy faces. So 5/8 had the happy faces. If 840 gnomes had happy faces, so that's going to equal 840. How many lived in the magic forest? So we have to get from here to some type of number that will give us the total. There's a couple of different ways you could do that. We can use this formula. 5/8 times x is equal to 840. Or we can cross multiply. We could say 5/8 is equal to 840 over some other number. It's going to end up being the same problem. So what do we do whenever we have a variable and a fraction? We want to get rid of the fraction, right? It makes us uncomfortable. We don't like it. So what do? We use the reciprocal and we multiply so that we can say 8 times 5 is 40, 5 times 8 is 40, 40 over 40 is 1, so that becomes a 1x by itself. But whatever we do to this side, we have to do to this side to keep it balanced. So we're going to say times 8/5, and this is going to be over 1, right? I'm going to erase this just momentarily, just so we can focus on this one. So we know that this reduces, these cancel out, and this is x all by itself. All right, so now let's figure out what this is. So 840 times 8 is equal to 6,720. 1 times 5 is 5. So we divide that by 5. We get 1,344. Now, if I use this as a ratio, as a proportion, I can say 5/8 is equal to 840 out of some number. So 5 out of 8 is equal to 840 out of some number that we don't know. So then we would cross multiply and say 5 times x is 5x, right? And then we would say, let me get the calculator to come up. 8 times 840 equals 6,720, right? And then we divide that by 5 because, come on, calculator, there we go. Divide that by 5 because 5 times x is 7,200 or 6,720. So we do the reciprocal, we divide by 5, and when we do that, we get that x is equal to 1,344. Now, whichever way makes the most sense to you, that's the way that you can use. But we've introduced this formula to you so that you can have another option. Maybe it's not clear. This is an option that will get you to the same place and is actually in fewer steps, right? Let's try another one. Let's try 62.2. All right, 62.2. On Monday, 2 4/5 times the acceptable number of rock badgers took refuge in the mountain caves. So we can get rid of rock badgers, right, in the mountain caves. So on Monday, 2 4/5 times the acceptable number took refuge. If 640 was the acceptable number, how many took refuge? Okay, so 2 4/5 times the acceptable number took refuge. If 640 was the acceptable number, how many took refuge? So what we're going to do is we're going to set this up. If this is the acceptable number, then you can take this out and put 640 over the top of that, right? Because 640 equals the acceptable number, the AN. So we could put that in here. 2 4/5 times 640 equals what? That's going to be our formula. So 2 4/5. I hate to write that mixed number, so I'm not going to. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 4 is 14 over 5. 14 over 5 times 640 equals X. That's going to be our problem right here. So now all we do is we put this over 1. We pull out our trusty calculator, and we say 14 times 640, right? And we know 5 times 1 is 5, and that's our denominator, so we're going to divide by 5, and that gives us 1,792. So the acceptable number was 1,792. Is how many, I'm sorry, that's not the acceptable number. That's how many. That's 2 4/5 times the acceptable number. All right? That's how you would find that right there. All right, so the other thing that we would do is we would use it as a proportion. We would take our fraction, which is 14 over 5. 2 times 5 is 10 plus 4. 14 over 5. That's our ratio. Okay, this is the number that took refuge in the mountain caves. 5 represents the acceptable number, so therefore we put 640 here because that's going to be in line with the acceptable number. This many is the actual ratio, 14 to 5. Should only be 5. We don't know what that number is up here. So now we just cross multiply. And we get that 14 times 640 here is equal to 5x. Well, we just did that in the calculator, 14 times 640, and then we divide both sides by 5. All right, that gives me that is equal to x, right? 640 divided by 5, let's see, we get 14 times 640 divided by 5, that's going to be 1,792. Same number that we got over here. This is just written a little bit differently. It depends on how your brain sees it. If your brain sees it like this with this formula, which is the F times A equals B formula, or if your brain sees it as a proportion, just make sure when you're writing your proportion that you keep the same type of numbers in the same location. So this was the acceptable number, the denominator for the acceptable number, and this was the actual acceptable amount. So this represented the actual acceptable amount. This represented how many more it was, and this would have been that actual, except more than the acceptable amount, that actual representation. But what you end up getting is this. You get that 1,792. This is just a ratio where if you reduce this fraction, you get 14 over 5. And that's what makes this work as a proportion, or that's what makes the ability to do a proportion let this work. Okay, that's what makes the proportion an acceptable format for solving the problem, is because reducing this fraction gives you this. Okay, it is basically being solved in the same way as just structured a little bit differently. Let's do 62.3. Let me clear this. All right, 62.3. When the fog lifted, 400 ghosts were spied skulking near the outskirts. If 240 ghosts were not spied, what fraction of the ghosts were not spied? All right, so before we start solving this problem, I just want to make a point to everyone within the sound of my voice. Ghosts are not real. There are no such thing as ghosts. When you die, you either go to heaven or you go to the bad place. I just want to make that clear. So this is a hypothetical, imaginary situation. Don't get scared of ghosts. They're not real. When the fog lifted, 400 ghosts were spied skulking near the outskirts. All right, so we got 400 of something here. If 240 were not spied, what fraction? So 400 were seen, 240 were unseen, right? What's our total number? 640. That's our total. So what we have to do is we have to set this up to figure out what the fraction is that were unseen. So we are going to write that fraction here. 240 out of 640, right? That's our fraction. So and all we really have to do is reduce that. Easy peasy. And the way we reduce that, you can choose to first of all reduce everything by 10, and then you get 24 over 64. And then you could reduce that again and say, okay, divide it by 2, that's going to be 12 over 32. And then you could reduce that again by 4 and say 3 over 8. And that would be a right way to do that. That would work. But another way to do that would be to say, okay, what is the fraction times this total that equals 240? This is using our formula. The fraction times some number equals another number. Right? So doing it this way, what we end up with is two factors here that we have to divide. We have to undo this multiplication. Isn't that the same thing we started with? It is. It is. So this goes away because 640 over 640 is 1. So our fraction is 240 over 640. And then to get the answer, we do the exact same thing that we did up here. We just reduce as many times as possible, and then we end up with 3 over 8. All right, so if you can go ahead and see this in your head, skip this step. But if you can't, do the formula. F times A equals B. The FAB formula. All right, that is all we have for lesson 62. Pay attention to what is being said. Understand the number that is being sought after. Okay, understand what is being asked. The only way you can solve this problem is by adding these two together to get the total. If you don't know the total, you can't do the correct problem. You've got to have the ratio in order to create the fraction. So look for the ratio, look for how to find the ratio, and you'll get there. So I think what I want to do is give you one more problem to kind of figure this out. I'm not going to type this one out. I'm just going to read it off the page. When daylight came, 640 crickets were seen. So 640 were seen outside the school. If another 160 crickets were unseen, what fraction of the crickets were not seen? So what fraction of the crickets were unseen? The unseen is 160. All right. What fraction of all the crickets is unseen? So all the crickets is going to be the seen and the unseen added together. So that's going to be 800. So fraction times 800 is equal 160. We divide. 800 over 800 is 1. 160 divided by 800. So first we divide everything by 10. That equals 16 over 80. Now we divide everything by 8. We get 2 over 10. Now we divide everything by 2. We get 1 over 5. So this is our fraction. So 1/5 of 800 is 160. That is the answer. All right. So you've got to think about what it's asking. It's what fraction of all the crickets were unseen. This was the seen, this was the unseen, this is all the crickets. Okay? I hope that helps you with that type of problem, with the addition of the two different numbers problem for these fractional word problems. All right, I'll see you guys in lesson 63.